So our next park and collection of coasters would occur 5 days after Castles and Coasters at the one and only Knott's Berry Farm. For those who are unaware, this park in Buena Park, California is California's oldest large-scale park, with the business opening back in 1940, originating from a chicken restaurant that decided to entertain their guests with rides, such as the Calico Mine Ride and Timber Log Ride, and would slowly grow their portfolio. Along with this, Knott's would also become well known for many roller coasters, some being historically important, some being unique models, and some being noted as world class. And thanks to being near Disney Universal in that Southern California area, specifically near Los Angeles, along with the notable rides and atmosphere, Knott's is likely the most successful property in terms of attendance and revenue for the Cedar Fair slash Six Flags company. However, today we're not doing a park review, as even though I reviewed both Castle Coasters and Six Flags Magic Mountain, along with their rides, and didn't do all the experiences, I unfortunately had less experience with this park, having only experienced 3 of the 10 operating roller coasters plus one defunct credit, only doing a couple of basic flat rides as well, and rode the Calico Mine Ride 2 years ago, in which I didn't really analyze the experience compared to now, and therefore didn't get a complete Knott's Berry Farm experience when comparing to a more well-experienced visit at Six Flags Magic Mountain or Castles and Coasters. Instead, I'll be reviewing the 3 coasters that I rode on March 7th, 2024, that being Coastrider, Xcelerator, and Hangtime, since they all hold a coincidence, not including the fact they're all located in the boardwalk section of the park. In my coaster rankings analysis so far, I've been aware that compared to other enthusiasts, I may have different opinions and tolerances when it comes to how I may value one coaster over the other. And while my tolerance for roughness or uncomfortableness is high, along with high tolerances for aggressive forces being high, I believe that the most significant difference for myself when looking at the coasters is sequencing of the layout that makes the coaster stand out or is made unique instead of the strength of forces on itself being an attractive piece. I'll explain this later when I get to reviewing the coasters that fit in this category. But for now, I'll explain what was the environment of the park when I was there. Back on March of 2024 was an extremely busy day at Knott's Berry Farm, being the event called Knott's Physics Day, where middle and high schools across the area of Southern California and northern Mexico could participate in one of many contests that were provided. In return, this caused absurd waits for many rides, with the large coasters like Hangtime or Silver Bullet to get most of the day 2 hour waits at least. Plus, large coasters like Ghost Rider and Xcelerator were closed for most of the day, with the latter barely opening at the end of the day. Although I did hear rumors that Ghost Rider opened at the end of the day as well, even though being listed as closed. Of course, Montezuma's Revenge was still closed for their remodification and refurbishment to the ride, and most of the family coasters still had an hour wait that I wasn't interested in doing at the time. Additionally, I barely had any time to ride these rides, as many of my group members had events in the middle of the day to attend to. It was crazy, and if it wasn't getting on Xcelerator or Hangtime, I would have had a failed day and perhaps disliked the day when in terms of like rides and stuff. But yeah, all I rode that day was Ghost Rider, Xcelerator, Hangtime, and a few flat rides that were in the boardwalk section. And with this background information out of the way, let's start off with the first roller coaster of the day, that being Coast Rider. Coast Rider is a large park model Wild Mouse layout created by Mock Rides. This 2013 Wild Mouse would be the ninth installation of 10 of the same layout, and the first one bought directly by Cedar Fair for this version of the layout. According to a reliable source called RCDB, or the Roller Coaster Database, The first one of this layout would go to Europa Park called Matterhorn Blitz. Compared to the other mock mice, this layout would be notable for the first large drop of 49 feet, along with the initial set of hairpin turns staying less compact, likely due to a more minimalistic columns, compared to the more scaffolding uh, supports there in most wild mice. The Europa Park version specifically would have an elevator lift instead of a traditional chain lift that all future layouts of the ride model would equip with a chain lift, including Coast Rider. While there were installations at Europa Park, Candles, Wonderland, King's Dominion, Knott's Berry Farm, and Sorky parks, the these layouts were more common with the Legoland parks, with one of these examples coincidentally opening at Legoland, California in 2001. This would also be ironic for Coast Rider, since there would be a literal comparison piece of the layout since 2017, where Coast Rider experienced an incident where a kid got injured when exiting the vehicle while moving, in which the ride got the shin guards that made the ride infamous. Even worse so than other rides to have shin guards like Premier or RMC roller coasters to have this issue. Whereas both RMC and Premier coasters were designed intentionally to accommodate adult riders for shin guards, Coast Rider would instead have a steel pipe welded to somewhat perpendicular to the lap bar, where the rider's legs would ride, likely intent to keep smaller children in. While this safety measure might have worked in theory, many writers outside the smaller demographic had problems with how the shin guards were not considered shins of larger legs, in which with the lap contacting the rider's thighs would also compress against the rider's shins. This primarily caused this ride to be in many people's bottom two of operating thrill roller coasters in the state, with the other being Kong at the Six Flags Discovery Kingdom, and one of the most hated coasters in the world. Thankfully, for my ride, I was one of the lucky ones not to be impacted by these restraints. Thanks to my thighs and calves being a little bit more thick, the lap bar didn't lower much to impact my ride. At worst, there were maybe slight discomfort when dispatching, based on how close the shin guards were to my legs, but otherwise wasn't a problem for me. I will say that the shin guards felt like a one-sided solution in a weak decision, especially when rider comfort in 2017 would try considering as many people with ride designs, such as many roller coasters or family coasters with lap bars, having more freeing restraints. But maybe these comparisons weren't a thought when considering restraint modifications, or maybe the shin guards were too difficult to think of a comparable solution without modifying too much of the current restraint mechanism. But it's enough with talk with my tangent of the restraints. Let's talk about the capacity. Now, normally, when talking about wild mice coasters, they are typically on the lower side, as while many cars do exist on ride and have 2 to 3 dispatched on the course, they typically hold 4 people per person, in which can create inflated lines based on the smaller amount of riders that the ride can hold all together. Although dispatches are around a minute in length, that could help in some capacity. Finally, I'd like to mention that I rode this early in the day, where Coast Rider had around a 15-minute late, hence why we decided to ride it. Although it could have a longer wait later on in the day, as capacity says so. Anyways, to start off the ride experience, you first have a slow turn into the lift hill, which with the lift hill brings you up to your 252 feet. After the lift, it follows a turn of very mild laterals. After the turn, follows the ride's largest drop of 49 feet, providing a light moment of positives in the valley and being the only moment of speed the coaster has. Now, remember when I said that I wasn't impacted by restraints? Well, actually, I dislike the coaster still, since apart from this drop, the ride felt extremely slow, even when not hitting the block brakes at every section. I actually think that out of all the non-kiddie coasters I have ridden, this felt the slowest in pacing, with many turns feeling like a pre-lift on many parts, and not the fun ones. And the drops feel like is what you get on a coaster like Speedy Gonzales Hot Rod Racers in a sense of speed. This is my second least favorite thrill coaster, and a 2.5 roller coasters I actually disliked. With the only saving grace is there's some sporadic moments of weak laterals that I felt in the ride's top half, and the ride is smooth. But honestly, at least slight and sporadic bumps in the track would have made the ride kind of entertaining in an ironic way. I honestly want to end this section here, since there's really nothing else that happens with the ride. This therefore ranks 39th out of 46. I mean, it was better than I was expecting, but the coaster felt like it took one step above the bottom of the list, so it's not really any better, and would have been really disappointing if that was the only coaster to ride on my day, since I expect more from Knott's Berry Farm, and that their coaster collection is much more varied and much more stuff, and much more entertaining, instead of riding a slow clone that I could actually ride closer to me technically. And it'll be like that until the evening, where one coaster would change that through perception. Fortunately, Xcelerator did eventually open, even though it was delayed. To give some background on Xcelerator, this would be the park's tallest coaster at 205 feet, along with being the prototype for the hydraulic-driven launch system. Hydraulic launch coasters in general were known to be compatible and built for fast accelerations and higher speeds, without excessive use of materials or electricity, when compared to the slower accelerations when using sufficient energy like LSMs or LIMs, and or incapability for higher speeds, with the materials used with higher launches or flywheel launches. Probably the closest system that may have been as successful would be the weight drop or air compressed launch systems. However, the former would need a large and tall shaft in order to accelerate to a fast speed, along with if a comparably slower and more fixed acceleration. Air compressed launches, while proven to be capable of faster accelerations along with fast speeds, showed much more reliability problems compared to the hydraulic system, based on the reaction to compressed air, along with the launch being louder based on the release of air. Well, I doubt that air compressed launches were considered as an option due to the only operating example before 2002 opening in 2001, along with many large roller coasters taking 1 to 2 years at fastest to construct. The hydraulic launch seemed at the time to be the best option for parks that wanted a high-speed launch in a compact space, like what not likely wanted for Xcelerator's plot of land. However, these systems would be known in the enthusiast community and for the parks to be for being unreliable. Specifically, the ones that were merged in the Six Flags Corporation chain. These would be known for staying closed for more time than how long the ride was operating, with many moments of downtime, either with long delays before opening or scheduled closures, along with the fact that these were expensive to operate, based on the launch's many moving parts needed to be replaced and freshly fabricated, especially when Intamin discontinued the launch system. From what I've heard, Xcelerator seemed to be the least bad headache in Six Flags chain for hydraulic launches coasters, based on Top Thrill Dragster being despised by Dick Kenzel, the Cedar Fair's CEO that bought the attraction, along with King Dakar was requiring approximately per year $1 million to operate and had a low uptime, eventually closing in late of 2024. Xcelerator would still have problems staying reliable, often unscheduled downtime on a mostly daily basis. But what about my experience? Well, I like to mention before, the ride would have a delayed opening and wouldn't operate to the public until the end of the day. At most beforehand, we've seen many test cycles beforehand, which did show some hope of Xcelerator opening. Along with the delayed opening, I was looking forward to finding a large coaster to ride. Based on the other coasters getting absurd weights, having around 1 to 2 hour waits for the family coasters, and then the thrill coasters were open did exceed 2 hours. I was thinking if Xcelerator opened while we were in the boardwalk section of the park, then we could get a short wait on Xcelerator and finally get a thrill coaster from the park. And since we were at this point on the review, I can confidently say that I did get to ride the coaster. But before talking about the ride experience itself, I first want to talk about the other aspects of the ride. First off, I like to say that we've gotten lucky with the queuing situation. Typically, I've heard that accelerators hold the longest waits in the park, likely due to having the appeal of being tall, fast, and launching out of the station, all of the two essential block sections being the station slash launch. And at the final break, add on with the 22-second ride, and thus operations aren't really flexible with what they can do. I assume that they would only run one train on a daily basis, based on loading times not really being quick on most, if not all days, in order to have a quicker throughput and not to put wear and tear on the second train. All of the advice I could probably give, based on similar situations that I've done at the other park, is you're at the park at Rope Drop, and if you're not interested in riding Ghost Rider at all, or you're planning to ride Ghost Rider on its last few hours, then probably check on Xcelerator if the ride is testing or is open. If it's not going to open in a short time, then maybe do some of the rides on the other thrill attractions first. Then check to see if the ride is open. When talking about the station, there is also an extended queue for the front row. However, this may let in 2 to 4 people per cycle, so even if you want the speed and forces, it may take a while if there's a few or more people waiting in the queue. Now, I assume on any day of operation, the front or back may provide the most forces. Since in those roads, I've heard that coaster is guaranteed to provide ejector airtime in those rows. Plus, the front could have some yank on the launch based on where the catch card is located, along with the additional speed. I unfortunately chose row 7 or the front for car 4, since this would be one of the coasters I would be slightly anxious for before riding post Six Flags Magic Mountain. Now, to be fair, I was totally fine with the height of 205 feet. Even though Xcelerator is my tallest and fastest coaster, I've seen taller with Goliath, X2, and Superman Escape from Krypton at Six Flags Magic Mountain, along with Mako at SeaWorld Orlando. It was even fun riding Goliath towards the end of my night at Magic Mountain, and almost did, until it temporarily closed when approaching the station. Instead, my theater was referring to the launch directly out from the station. You remember how I said the hydraulic launches are known to have fast accelerations? Well, Xcelerator had one of the fastest accelerations in the world for roller coasters, at a whopping 16.02 meters per second squared. If we converted the acceleration to gravitational units, this would almost reach 2Gs or surpass 2Gs of force if we are using the 1G equivalent to 19.81 meters per second squared as a comparison piece, especially compared to my prior most forceful launch, either Arctic Rescue or Full Throttle, which, while they do have some feeling of acceleration, they were weak compared to Xcelerator. I honestly wish that I sat in the most rear car, as there's a prime reason I'll mention in the elements. To mention the restraints, these have a lap seat belt and a famous T-bar restraint from Intamin. These the lap bar felt exposed throughout my body and no upper body contact, along with minimal contact at a lap bar. Along with the seat and headrest feeling comfortable the entire time I sat in the seat, especially compared to riding Desert Storm trains the Saturday before, feeling weird to sit down. Anyways, starting off the experience, you board the station, hit restraints check, and at one point the train moves backwards, extremely slightly. Now, for those unfamiliar with the Intamin cable launch, which some question why the train moved back or not noticed what happened, but those who are familiar with knowing that This is what happens when the train does for a few seconds before launching, likely due to minimizing any wear and tear from the effect of inertia when the catch car impacts the train. Knowing how the train launch worked along with the launch directly taking place in the station, the ride created anticipation before the ride and launch for myself. As excluding the rollback and hard to see Christmas tree lights that tell you when the ride launches, no indication tells you when the launch happens. But what about the launch itself? Honestly, I have to give credit to Intamin for finding a launch this powerful in experiment number one. The launch had the motion of slingshotting the train out of the station to the end of the launch track. Along with the motion of the train, the forces of the launch pressed my upper body back into my seat rest for 2 seconds of acceleration that was experienced. Additionally, the acceleration I felt the forces impacted a little in my rib cage when reaching the end of the launch track, which no acceleration period has done before for me. Not even the fast accelerating motor vehicles I've experienced that were designed for fast accelerations had that effect. After the launch, a decently strong burst of positives occurs in the entry of the top hat. Next moment, while I didn't have any forces from my ride, was still quite interesting to experience, with the twists going up to the top hat taking a couple of seconds. As ascending, I felt the top hat feel longer than crest in a traditional airtime hill or drop, which I understand that the top hat are typically more compact than a twisting camelback, along the additional height of the Xcelerator compared to other drops that is similar, but still the feel is different. Next comes probably my biggest disappointment of the ride. With Xcelerator's top hat curve, most enthusiasts say that the descending or descending had ejector time with the top hat. Now, while I do think that they might be telling the truth, probably are, as I may think that this could have theoretically been on my one of the weakest cycles. I unfortunately had gotten no airtime, which one of the trains of the day, riding in row 7 of 10, stapling myself in the train, and or having a launch system running slower than usual, since I've heard the Interim designs the system to have a launch speed determined how much sufficient hydraulic pressure is used from an analysis used from the last 3 cycles. And while I completely understand that my ride is supposed to give airtime, the ride itself, and gotten a weak ride, I have to still stick to my analysis I have gathered in order to rank this reliably, and I cannot rank theoretical possibilities. I'm hoping I can get rewrites in the future to get this airtime though, but enough of my tangent. What else does the top hat offer? Well, I do appreciate getting a nice view of the nearby neighborhoods from the top hat, especially since the ride is in a corner of the park. Plus, as a bonus, I did get to see the sunset on the ride, so that was nice. After the top hat crest, there was a twisting drop down. I remember not getting any forces during my rides throughout the descent. And finally, there are 2 overbanks of the coaster. I honestly was wishing that these overbanks did have some positives, but these exclusively demonstrate the speed. While many could like the exclusive sensation of speed on a roller coaster, I honestly am not really impressed, especially when I had many experiences of having the sensation of speed, most commonly on the highway that lead the person to long drives. I exclusively care for the forces and the sequencing of the ride when riding roller coasters, specifically. Anyways, after the second overbank, the ride ends just like that. Now, before talking about my problems with the coasters, I want to mention some positives with the coaster that I do think that are notable, as there are a few positives that I do think are here. Mentioning smoothness, out of the Intamin coasters I've been on, this is by far the smoothest. I felt no resemblance of rattle or vibration on this coaster, which have been present on at least one time on Arctic Rescue and Credit Coaster and Half Pipe at Eilish Gardens. Additionally, I felt this coaster was unique on my rides. No coaster that I've ridden before, and after this, feeling extremely similar. The most comparable to Xcelerator is Full Throttle and Electric Eel, but the premier layouts try different stuff compared to Xcelerator. The trains felt pretty comfortable to sit in, along with the seat and restraint combo feeling minimally supported when talking about restraints. And the forceful moments on the ride carried the ranking, with the launch being one of my favorite moments on a coaster for myself, especially with the launch feeling unique in acceleration. Although I could say that for every intimate launch I've done, it is somewhat unique from each other. However, I will say that the launch, from my experience, is probably the only appealing part of the ride. This ride is less valued in my eyes compared to other enthusiasts, many due to the short length of the ride, accompanied by inconsistent moments of forceful moments. If anyone remembers my full throttle segment from my Six Flags Magic Mountain review, I said, well, pretty forceful and varied. I said the ride felt incomplete and pacing suits the limited amount of elements it provides, along with the feeling of just having a beginning and end. Xcelerator's case is similar, where the launch and pull out from the launch to the top hat were the only moments of force from my experience. In that perspective, that's only two of the six elements that Xcelerator has that I consider to have force. And the six elements aren't really that much in reality going to speed. So if I do want to give this a higher ranking in the future, then I'm hoping that the ride could run faster on my next visit or sit somewhere more like towards the ends of the trains, so these forces could be present and stronger. Because I know the coaster has potential to be better, and know that I've gotten a weak ride. I still like the coaster and enjoyed all the elements that were presented, but in terms of the preferences of what I prefer in a coaster, I would rather take a consistently paced coaster over a one-trick pony that does the trick really well. Anyways, I'm ranking this 17th out of 46, just barely surpassing Arctic Rescue as my favorite Intamin, thanks to the ride having some weak forces in that ride. And for those who are concerned, Tile Twister is at 23rd, so Hangtime Xcelerator is an inferior to all my thrill credits. But there are some that do thus surpass Xcelerator that people may disagree with, such as my final coaster tonight, which was Hangtime. Hangtime is a 2018 Gerstlauer Infinity multi-looper at Knott's Berry Farm, which was marketed as California's first dive coaster. This multi-looper would be Gerstlauer's tallest coaster in the U.S. at 150 feet, and Gerstlauer's second tallest coaster after Carnan at Hansa Park, along with holding California's steepest and only beyond vertical drop at 96 degrees, and holding a vertical lift hill, all condensed with 2,198 feet of track and 5 inversions, which is pretty impressive when fitting in a small plot of land where the original 1975 corkscrew and later a Vekoma boomerang sat, along with the queue line for the coaster being condensed there as well. This would be my introduction to a thrilled Gerstlauer, my first vertical lift hill, along with my being my second Gerstlauer after Coastal Source at Legoland, California. Interesting fact it was this wouldn't be my first opportunity to try a vertical lift hill. If I exclude my 2022 trip to Knott's Berry Farm, I also traveled to Glenwood Caverns in 2023, where Defiance was open. And probably my biggest missed opportunity of 2023 coasters, due to feeling anxious about the feeling of a vertical lift hill potentially, and the 102-degree draw, along with the hot Colorado sun during the summer, potentially being a problem when staring up a vertical lift hill, along with not being used to looking at heights above 100 feet yet. Thankfully, that fear of heights would dissolve over time from July 2023 to January 2024. And additionally, I was curious to find out what a vertical lift felt, heightening my curiosity after discovering how the acceleration of Xcelerator fell and keeping the energy of riding thrill coasters to hang time. When talking about the capacity aspect, Boarding had moderate efficiency, as on one hand, restraints and seatbelts were easy to check, based on the simpler setup of restraints and the smaller length of trains. On the other hand, while loose articles could be placed in bins, which also applies to Xcelerator, these bins could theoretically slow dispatches, especially when the other train stops on the block break prior to the station. On the plus side, there are 16 passenger trains, which, while not the best for capacity, are at least some of the best when compared to other vertical lift coasters. Additionally, the ride would operate with 2 to 3 trains, which could be sufficient enough for the amount of block zones given. Lines would also be on the longer side for the park, given that the coaster is one of the larger coasters, in which, for crowded days, try expecting for the lines to appear. Now, when approaching the station and train, there are 4 rows per train, seating 4 people per row. When it comes to seating preferences, you can discuss what row. Now, despite getting one ride on the coaster, I'll say that the row that I rode, which was the back, would have the more forces based on the potential airtime moments being strongest there, and compared to other Gerstlauer Beyond Vertical Draw coasters from 2018 that I rode called Adrenaline Peak. The back and front likely don't make a difference for the inversions, even though Hangtime has twice the capacity and twice the rows. Speaking of adrenaline peak comparisons, I would probably say that the edge seat would likely be better for laterals compared to the inner seats on Hangtime. Although it might contain a little vibration, I really can't not verify, as one ride was in the back inner seat, which was smooth from my experience. Finally, before getting into the layout, I'll say that the ride restraint is pretty comfortable, with the seat doing good contouring by body, along the lap bar feeling cushioned, easy to hold on, and exposed towards the upper body. Anyways, starting off, the layout is rather a vertical chain lift, up towards the max height of 150 feet. Now, from my experience with the Gerstlauer vertical lift hills with lap bars, the bottom of the lift surprisingly are compact enough where my lap and thighs would push up towards the lap bar. Like my body slides towards the thigh contacting piece of the lap bar, which is honestly kind of cool, along with the feeling of being a bit freaky. Although, this is thankfully safe. I am curious if this is exclusive to Gerstlauer lift the have lap bars, or vertical lift tilts like the Zamperla Thunderbolts Intimate Vertical Chain Lift, Mauer X-Car slash Sky Loop models, and the Gerstlauer over-the-shoulder restraint variations have the same sensation. I mean, I might discover this if Lightning at Mundo Patata happens, and whatever we choose for April 2025 will be either the New York City area or Universal. But that's a debate that will be discussed at a later date. Anyways, what follows is the ride's holding break, which apparently makes this California's first dive coaster, according to the marketing from the park. In reality, I don't find this to feel like a genuine dive coaster, since the definition of a dive coaster for me could literally be uh, for this example of the dive coaster could literally be applied for many coasters, such as TMNT Shellraiser clones, Defiant, Mystery Mine, any of the Intimate Impulse coasters that have a holding break, and the Vekoma Boomerangs, family or traditional, which, while you may argue that these can or cannot be dive coasters, it still presents a vague concept of a stoppage before one of the main or first drops, compared to dive coasters models specifically made by B&M, where the front truly embraces the view of the draw in the anticipation of the sudden release, similar, if not identical, to how a drop tower functions. Not to mention, this clarification of not being a dive coaster doesn't take away from the ride nor holding break element. Just that I wanted to define what a dive coaster is for myself. Now, with the holding break, the ride presents different anticipation for the drop compared to a B&M dive coaster. Now, since this holding break is a permanent magnet rather than chain or electromagnet like LIMs or LSMs, the train would rather move slowly instead of releasing the train with full gravity. The anticipation comes in with the falling drop, where gravity takes over in the back row once the brakes are cleared. And if you know what forcing Xcelerator beyond vertical drops provides, that adds to the anticipation. Which, while I didn't feel like how I categorize what anticipation is provided by a dive coaster, I still appreciate how the drop was handled outside of forces. But anyways, the main drop portion of the drop, and probably the highlight element of the ride, is cresting over the drop, giving sustained and decently strong ejector air time throughout the upper portion of the drop. I remember the ejector air time pressed my lap towards the lap bar in similar fashion to the ejector air time moments of Twisted Colossus, Wonder Woman Flight of Courage, or Full Throttle, although comparably toned down. Additionally, the drop airtime felt abrupt when transitioning from how much to impact the force has. In terms of first drops, I'll probably rank this below the Magic Mountain trio from what I've experienced. So probably fourth, fifth, or sixth favorite, depending on the day out of the two Xcelerator Beyond Vertical drops I've done, and potentially Electric Eel. After the first drop's crest falls a valley, which shows the coaster's bread and butter, meaning that the ride, like Scream, throws consistent and decent positive G segments throughout every, every valley crest. And while it isn't really intense and positive strength, this is a sensation that I do enjoy, based on the frequency of the coaster elements feeling like kind of quick. Anyways, your first valley will lead the train into the one-of-a-kind inversion called a negative G-stall loop. This being a combination of both a battling inversion and a finish loop, where the first top portion of is a non-inverting hill, while the second part is a sidewinder-like inversion. I like to say that this element that there may not be potential for some laterals or the tallest point of the first half of the inversion, but sadly, I did not get to experience this in the inner sea. Additionally, the valley in the midpoint of the inversion does give the same amount of positives and strength, and ironically to the name, gives no hang time in the negative G-stall loop from my rides. Good job, Gerslauer. Anyways, after the negative G-stall loop follows a corkscrew. Again, decent in strength for positives on the connecting points of this inversion. Plus, holds the consistent momentum established by the sequencing of the inversions. This also applies to the cutback as well, but here's where the ride introduces the second airtime element. This downward slope, also giving ejector airtime which when descending the element. It's a bit tamer in strength when compared to the first drop, but still pretty forceful, and it still felt abrupt. Finally, follows a Cobra roll, which comparing to my other two Cobra rolls was disappointing. While both valleys provided the same decent positive G-forces as before, I feel like the Cobra roll had in a inner seat felt forceless in the middle section. Compared to my rides on Scream, which I had a lateral entering and exit the middle part, while Boomerang kept the positives consistent from the vertical portions. While not a bad element, I still feel disappointed for this element. Anyways, the ride ends after hopping up into the brakes, which could theoretically give it airtime in the front, but fortunately the back did cannot experience. Oh well, at least I enjoyed the ride. Plus the back is likely more quantitative for airtime, all by one more element. So I think my rides in the back were satisfying enough. In general, I enjoyed that the ride felt decently long with the elements, with 8 total elements within 33 seconds of the ride, which while in duration isn't really long, the frequency of elements made the ride feel more entertaining and complete compared to the really short and compact coasters that I've ridden. Along with the consistent pacing, the ride did feel somewhat varied with the airtime moments, helping the ride feel more nuanced and adding more to a standard multi-looper in terms of force types. Although I will say that the ride could have been improved with more consistent laterals or hang time, since my rides didn't include these forces. Final thing to mention before ranking the coaster was that this would be the sleeper hit for my day at Knott's Berry Farm, as I didn't really expect to like the ride as much as I did, since the reputation of the coaster is known to be an okay ride, and known as a respectable third after Xcelerator and Ghost Rider. So, how would I rank Hangtime? While unlike most coasters in the past I've ranked, I actually do have slower comparison P's. Closer. That being Scream. My experience on Scream Highs felt similar with Hangtime's main moment, that being the most inversions valleys in the first half of Scream, serving the same rapid-paced motion of frequent positive G-forces, along with the secondary force being implemented once or twice. However, from my experience, I find that Scream inferior for two reasons. One being that I prefer ejected airtime on Hang Time over the lateral moments on Scream. And second was that whereas Scream had a long section of forceless track, after the block section, Hang Time really had no dead spots. So since Scream is ranked seventh of 46, I ranked Hang Time at fifth out of 46. Since my main issue with Hang Time is that Hang Time ironically has no Hang Time nor laterals. And as a side note, for sixth ranking, hang time doesn't really impact the coaster's ranking. It's its own fault for being at sixth. But that's a story for a future review. Of the many coaster and visits and reviews, this may have been the most consistent on differentiating from other enthusiast views. All three coasters had some ranking that didn't really match too many enthusiasts' thoughts on coasters, and which can show that despite these coasters being regularly talked about based on popular location of the park, that all three could have been discussed in different ways. Additionally, I was glad that to ride these attractions, as two of the three coasters were significant milestones, like Xcelerator having my first hydronic launch, being my first hyper coaster, and being my first thrill intimate, or Hang Time being my first Gerstler thrill coaster, Holding Break, first negative G stall loop in Cuphead, and the first load of vertical lip and beyond vertical drop that I've experienced. While this wasn't my first visit, this would likely not be the last, as there's still a reason to go back with many roller coasters, as there are seven left. The most notable coasters that I missed out on were unintentionally being Ghost Rider and Silver Bullet. And unless you want me to talk about my awesome credit debate of Calico Mine Ride, which is the next section, then I guess I'll see you guys next review, being my home park, SeaWorld San Diego. Before starting this section, I'd like to say that even though this couldn't be unlikely to happen, I just want everyone to stay safe and please do not message anyone that I mentioned, since the claims that were made subjectively and weren't that large in scale. And also that the person that I will be mentioning does not really need this additional attention. Additionally, the situation they probably didn't want really to discuss. So just keep the discussion of the Calico Mine Ride thing with me. Okay? Alright. So this isn't a review of the ride or anything, but more so a discussion about the topic that I've discussed on Discord, the Adrenaline Nation Discord, in the past. You see, the president of Knott's go-to animatronic company made a long presentation about the inspiration of the company, along with the projects they have dealt with, Knott's main storytelling rights that they use physical sets, which gave nice insight to the park's projects. One of the claims that was said was that the president said that Calico Mine Ride was in fact a coaster based on using gravity. Originally, I did believe this for the first 7 months, as the ride did use a chain lift in anti-rollbacks, along with turns that didn't act like a dark right turns, and which created a stupid debate that happened for many months within the Adrenaline Nation Discord server. They were bothered by its inclusion as a coaster, more so where the ride was ranked a little above Gold Rusher at Six Flags Magic Mountain. Thankfully now, I do not consider Calico Mine Ride as a coaster anymore, since it would feel inconsistent based on my consideration of only San Diego's Journey to Atlantis compared to the other JTAs, as my rule is that it must feel what only a coaster can do with the system, instead of like feeling like, along with at least two consecutive moments of roller coaster segments. Feel more like a roller coaster compared to any other ride system. Calco just had a long descent downwards. Um, Not really a thrilling one. I wanted to include this as a bonus, as I wanted to address this, along with not interrupting the pacing of the actual review. Anyways, I hope you guys have a good day, and see you guys next episode.